One of the most challenging things for a lot of us in life is learning how to do conflict well. Fortunately, there are some simple steps that if you practice them and get good at them, they will help you to utilize conflict to build stronger, healthier relationships. Hi everybody, this is Greg from Heart Tools, where we make it simple to build great relationships. And we've been learning how important it is to stay out of the triangle because it's so destructive for our relationships. Well, one of the main reasons we end up in triangles is because we don't do conflict with people in ways that are healthy. And when we don't resolve conflict with someone, well, it's very easy then to slide down into the victim role and they're our villain. Last video, we talked about how to stay out of that victim role by changing your relationship with the rescuer and not allowing people to take on your problems that you own. Well, just as important to stay out of the victim role is to learn how to do conflict with people in a way that strengthens the relationship, and so that you can stay out of the victim role where you're the powerless person and they're the villain who's ruining your life. So I'd like to share with you the most simple and effective method that I've learned for dealing with conflict, and it's something that I learned from Mary Schumart, who was for many years my therapist, and after she retired from being a therapist, she was still my life coach. And then when she retired from being a life coach, she still said she was available to me anytime if I had any needs, and really for over a decade was my most trusted advisor. And she just recently passed away, but it's really not too much to say that if there were no Mary, there would be no Heart Tools. So I sure would like to honor the role that she played in my life. And she taught me this simple method of dealing with conflict that she called the say-so principle. And there are 5 steps to the say-so principle, and 5 is too many for learning a simple behavior, but don't worry, we're going to break it down into 2 simple steps after we unpack this whole thing. So the first step of the say-so principle is to say what you see. And when you say what you see, what you're doing is you are describing a specific behavior, specific situation that is giving rise to the conflict. And it can be helpful to start with the phrase, I noticed, and then describe the specific behavior. So it could be something like, I noticed the dishwasher was not emptied 4 mornings this week. I noticed that your clothes and your toys are still all over the floor in your bedroom. I noticed you spent double what we have budgeted for entertainment last month. I noticed that you have been at least 25 minutes late to our last 4 meetings. So what you're doing is describing specific behavior or describing a specific situation in detail. And what you're not doing is evaluating or attacking the person that you have conflict with. I remember teaching this say-so principle in a class many, many years ago. And someone came back the next week and said, that didn't work at all. It started a big fight. And I said, okay, let's walk me through your say-so. How did you do it? And her first thing she said for say what you see is, I noticed that you're being really lazy. Well, that's not describing behavior, right? That is evaluating a person. And so even if you thought someone was being very lazy, what you want to do is describe a specific picture that makes you think in your mind, evaluate they're being lazy, but you don't talk about that. You just talk about the picture. The second step in the say-so principle is to say what you think. And you may start off that sentence with something like, I believe. So it's, I believe we agreed you would empty the dishwasher every morning before school. I believe we made a commitment that we wouldn't overspend on a budget item without first talking with one another. I believe that we made a deal that you would have your room cleaned up and all the toys and clothes picked up before it was time for family movie night, right? So you say what you believe. The third step of the say so principle is to say what you feel. And so it could be an emotion. I feel lonely. I feel frustrated. It could be an appetite, like I feel tired, I feel exhausted. Or it could be a sensation. I feel a knot in my stomach. I feel, tense all over. Say what you feel. The fourth step in the say so principle is to say what you want, and you will always want one of 5 things. You'll want them to start doing something. You will want someone to stop doing something. You'll want them to do more of something. You'll want them to do less of something, or you'll want them to do something different. And so figure out which of those 5 things you want and be very specific. And this is the part that I think people miss quite a bit when they're doing conflict, is they don't tell the person what they want. And so if you can paint the finish line for someone, it's easier for them to run to it, right? You don't want to make them guess. And we have a difficult time, particularly if we tend to live in the shame triangle, with doing this, because we have a hard time wanting. When our lives are filled with shame, wanting is really hard. Wanting feels selfish. Wanting feels like I'm a real person, right? And I have presence in the world, which when we have shame, that's very difficult. And so what we do is we tend to disguise our wants as criticisms of the other person. So instead of saying, here's what I want, here's what would make me happy, here's what would be fulfilling, we say things like, how come you never? Or, if you loved me, wouldn't you do this? Or, don't you think any normal, caring person, right? So that way we can criticize the other person's behavior without ever having to own what we want. But the fourth step in the say-so principle is to figure out exactly what you want, take ownership of it, and just tell the person, here's what would make me happy if you did this instead. And then the fifth and final step of the say-so principle, after you describe what you want, is to describe how that will benefit both of you in the relationship. Here's how it's going to benefit both of us if you get that dishwasher emptied before you go to school in the morning. Here's how it's going to benefit both of us if you don't overspend the budget without first checking in with me. Here's how it's going to benefit both of us and benefit our relationship if you get your toys and clothes picked up off your room before family movie night, right? Because there's always a benefit. And generally, there's a benefit for both you and the other person and for the relationship. And so what you're trying to do with this method of resolving the conflict is get to a point where you're strengthening the relationship. Now, here's why I think this method of resolving conflict is so helpful and effective. As you think about the 5 steps and you say, here's what I noticed, here's what I believe, here's what I feel, here's what I want, here's how I think it's going to benefit both of us. Who are you talking about when you go through that? You're not talking about the other person. You're not starting off by attacking them. What you are doing is talking about yourself, right? And that's why it's so important to use I language when you're doing the say-so principle and trying to resolve conflict, is because you're not attacking the other person. You are simply describing yourself. You're talking about you. Where we go wrong in conflict management is we start off by telling the other person what they're doing wrong and what they need to change, and it's an attack. And the most common and often appropriate response to being attacked is to get defensive, right? And so then the other person's defensive, and that leads to an argument. They have to argue back, right? And well, you do this and you're wrong about this. But if you're describing, here's me, here's what I see, here's what I believe, there's less room for an argument, right? Because they can't argue that you believe that. It's what you believe. They can't argue that you feel that. It's what you feel. They can't argue that you want that because it's what you want, right? And if you've described the behavior well and specifically, they can't argue with that. And so there's less room for it becoming an argument and more room for it becoming the outcome that you want. Now, that's not to say that it just becomes easy, because conflict is always hard. It's never easy. I remember the first time, and Mary had taught both me and my wife how to do the say-so principle, and I remember the first time my wife said, after we were married, I need to do a say-so with you. And I got, oh my goodness, I'm a horrible person. Yeah, go ahead and share it with me. But I just felt horrible, so it doesn't always make it easy, but what it does is it makes it doable, right? And that's what you want. You want conflict management that will end up with a strengthened relationship. And that's what that first say-so did with me and my wife, is I was able to see her heart and see how my behavior was impacting more clearly, and I was able to change my behavior to help her out. And when we learn to do this, when we learn to resolve conflict in this way, and by the way, what you're really doing is, instead of saying you're a bad person, you're saying I have a problem and I need your help in resolving this problem, right? Because as you go through the steps of the say-so principle, you're talking about the problem that you have, and you're inviting the other person to help you resolve that problem. And so that's another reason why it's less of an attack. But if we don't do this, then we end up in the triangle. And the thought that a lot of us have that really thwarts us in life is we have this idea, I would rather avoid conflict because conflict is mean and selfish, and I don't want to do that. I want to be loving. I would rather avoid conflict and resent you than enter into the conflict, be uncomfortable for a while, and strengthen the relationship. And it just doesn't work, and it always ends up putting us either in the triangle with someone because we have this unresolved conflict that we can't do with them because they're so bad, or ending the relationship altogether because we simply drift away so we don't have to do the conflict. So let me give you just 2 simple steps that you can practice that will help you get much better at resolving conflict, staying out of the triangle, and strengthening your relationships up on the stairway, where every time you resolve a conflict, life gets better and the relationship improves. The first step is to simply sit down and write out a say-so principle, right? Don't try to do it live from memory because it's going to be stressful and it's going to be hard and you'll lose your thought. Simply sit down and write out, take one conflict that you have with someone that you would like to resolve and just write out, what do you see, what do you believe, what do you feel, what do you want, and how it's going to help both of you. Now let me suggest that as you do this, that you pick someone safe and someone that you have high trust with as the place to start practicing. Later on, after you get good at that and have some success in your memory bank, then you can start doing it in riskier and riskier relationships. But if this is really hard, now for some of you, this is already, it's not emotionally difficult. You could do it with anybody. But if this is a challenge for you, start off with a conflict with someone that you already feel high trust in. And just write out all 5 steps. And then the second step is to ask permission to share it with them, right? It's always good to ask permission to do conflict because sometimes it's just not the right time. Someone's had the worst day in the world, or they've got the worst news they've ever had, or they're exhausted, or they're just in physical pain. It's not a good time to engage in doing a say-so with them. And so the second step, hey, I've got a say-so I'd like to do with you, or hey, I've got a problem I'd like your help with. That's a disarming way to talk about it. Is this a good time? Ask permission, and then if they say yes, then go ahead and share it. And if they say no, it's not a good time, then simply say, what would be a good time to talk about this, and set up a time to do that. So those are your 2 simple steps to practice this. Write one out, right? And I would say for a good long time, it would be a helpful practice to write out every say so before you do it, to make sure it's clear, to make sure it's fair, to make sure your description is really a description of behavior, not evaluation. Write it out and then just have it in front of you when you share it. Now, this doesn't mean that all conflict will always be resolved to your satisfaction if you do this, and we'll talk a little bit about that next in our next video and what to do about it. But it does mean that more conflict will be resolved with a lot less turmoil, and what will happen is you will discover your strength, and you will stop putting other people in the role of the villain and you're their victim, and it will create healthier, more loving, more life-giving relationships. Write out your say-so, ask permission to share them, and start sharing them. Simple steps, practice, practice, practice. That's what Heart Tools is all about.